And hello again. It's me. Still taking the opportunity while I have it, with the time that I have, to verbally address what these files are about. And in the previous podcast, I started talking with you about the simulation. And as far as my research goes, what I have discovered it to be, what its causes are, and where it's come from, and how it started. And I'm going to continue that conversation with you again soon. I was actually just checking out my channel and some stats and whatnot, and looked back at a previous podcast, which was very recent, called Public Health and Safety and Why the Internet is Illegal. And I wanted to mention a couple of other things about the Internet and why it is illegal that do fall under public health and safety, but more specifically national security. Now, as you know, we connect to the internet, and we're not just connecting with our own circle. We're not just connecting with our own state or country. We're connecting with the whole world. And this is an interesting position to find ourselves in, with the irony being that, the United States Department of Defense is sort of, the original arm for the internet. It's sort of all sprung from there. And defense is their aim. And yet, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, here we are in a realm online that places us at immediate risk. Now, as far as national security goes, and what happens when we plug in and access the world, is that we come into immediate contact with people from other countries. And the argument that can be put forward as to why that's okay is that, well, it's really no different to making an international phone call, and there's never been a law against that. But where that argument falls apart is that normally if we make an international phone call, we're calling one person in another country, not the entire country. And we're certainly not dialing the whole world at once. So something that's interesting to note is that in 2004, Facebook was founded, and then we had 2006, Twitter was launched, and 2010, Instagram. And I mentioned these three social platforms in the previous podcast about the simulation and their operation as apps, where Instagram is actually the only one that is just an app. There's no way that I know of that it can be used by desktop. And something interesting happened in the world in parallel to Facebook starting, and then Twitter. And that was in parallel. ISIS started. And the FBI were baffled because they were translating in all these different languages around about the same time that Google Translate was launched as well. And then when Instagram was launched in 2010, the incidence of terrorism all over the world jumped by about 800%. So not only are we, is our personal health and safety at risk when we come online immediately, and I'd go as far to say that the internet is basically a lethal trap. But we place our countries at risk when we connect to the internet. And there's talk about globalism and how the internet plays its role in creating a one world society, presumably for the purpose of creating a one world economy and an automated economy, using artificial intelligence and these systems to sort of automate humans into position so that everything can run as smoothly as they would like it. And I assume for them it's as simple as that. It's sort of, I think, the thing that gets under my skin, and you may have heard me speak rather strongly at different times so far about all of this, is because it takes a great deal of audacity to fly in the face of long-established national security protocols, international law, all the work that's been put into creating democracies and establishing laws that protect civilized nations, and the audacity that it takes to fly in the face of all of that, which in my opinion is what big tech has done. But the irony being that the United States Department of Defense is in on this as well, and it's one of those things where they sort of create a problem, they create the problem, and then implement these heavily restrictive measures on we the people to fix the problem that they created. But they never get rid of the problem. They never really address it. They just implement more restrictions and limitations on our freedom. Now, the large percentage of people who come online and enjoy being online fight vehemently for freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and this is their way of being able to communicate and have opinions on things that they feel matter to them or their country, politics, etc. But what the reality is when we dial up the whole world and we're participating in networks that give us access to politicians from other countries, for example, is that the whole world influences other people's elections. The whole world is exposed to terrorism and terrorists. The fact that Instagram and apps seem to signal an emergence of a terrorist group in the Middle East that was absolutely barbaric. I think it's worth noting that, as I've said before, events in the real world happen online first. And when we have terrorism gaining ground over a certain period of time in parallel to social media apps being released and these networks being founded, I think we have to look at what the connection is. For us to, for example, travel to another country in the real world, in the physical realm, there are certain things we need to do. We need to They'll be get a visa and a passport and catch the right plane and get let in at the other end. But we can't do that, usually without a visa and a passport. But online, all we need to do is plug in and we can talk to somebody we can talk to an entire country. We can actually communicate and be present with an entire country without a visa or a passport. And I understand that that's not exactly the same as being there physically, but what is really the difference between standing in front of somebody in the street in a different country and having that conversation online? What's the difference? The conversation is happening. And it's not just happening on the phone, it's happening with the whole country. It's happening at that country's prime minister or president. We are influencing other people's elections. We are having a say on what happens in other people's countries. And where, in some cases, that could be beneficial, and in other cases, it's not. Things like, there are different ages in different countries for what is considered to be a minor and what is considered to be an adult. And as we've seen in America, the internet thinks that a 13-year-old is an adult. Now, that's laughable for a start. Entirely laughable. And you're probably wondering, hey, hang on, that's not true. 16-year-olds are usually considered adults, and minors are under that. But I'm talking about the age of entry to the internet, and what kids have been exposed to, and they dropped the age of entry from 16 to 13. We've had 13-year-olds exposed to terrorism online, and terrorists. Now, in what other circumstance would that happen unless they were in that country? They're exposed to these people because we're actually in their country. This whole realm takes the entire planet and reallocates it to an entirely different sort of grid and structure, and enables all of us to communicate together at the same time. So there are no visas, there are no passports, and we get to have the same impact, if not a greater impact, with other countries than if we were to simply go there the old-fashioned way and get a visa and a passport and catch the right plane and do some sightseeing. And this poses a problem for national security. We, in my country, have had people, simply because of the internet, years ago, run over to the Middle East and join ISIS. I mean, because of the internet. It's not because they're disturbed. There's disturbed people everywhere. It takes the invitation. It takes the opportunity to present itself, and it's presented by the internet. And our governments are still quite happy for this to function. So there is a heavy national security concern, and a lot of these. I know that in the United States, they had to open new divisions in the Defense Department and manufacture new mechanisms and tools through which they could hear a signal that they needed to hear through all the noise that's being created by mobile internet, that the airwaves are now so completely saturated that when it comes to them performing their basic function of looking out for enemy signal, it's that much harder to find it. So, big tech is actually making national security more difficult in what they're doing here and how they're doing it. Apple, iPhones, smartphones. Ironically, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, who seem to think that our airways are a free-for-all and you can jam as much in there as you like and it's all going to be fine. Not really. And I'll get into that a little bit more in some future podcasts to do with the simulation. But, there it is. I mean, national security itself, there are certain protocols and there are international laws that have to be abided by, and the internet breaks every single one of those rules. And it's made it exceedingly difficult for us to maintain our safety as countries. The argument for a form of globalism is that we are one human race, that there might be some good that can come from broadening our worldview by having contact with people from other countries, by seeing what's really going on in other people's countries. But the reality of it is, and I'm all for helping where we can help and doing what needs to be done. But the reality of that is there are people already who run those countries. They already have leaders. And when there is some outcry on social media about something that's happening in somebody else's country, it can be enough to have their leaders listen and change things for the betterment of their own people. And I don't have a problem with that. But I would look at how the problem started in that country first. Because what we don't want to do is start making excuses for social media and the illegalities of the internet, just because through some of these networks people have been helped. We need to actually look at why did they need to be helped. We can't be creating problems and then throwing our hands up in the air going, yay, when we find the solution, which just ends up creating another problem, because the technology that's in use is what's underlying all of this. I think David Icke a long time ago described it as problem, reaction, solution, and inferred that the devisers of these problems were causing problems deliberately so that they could exploit public reaction to implement a solution which further restricted our freedoms and further advanced their agenda. But I'm not sure about the first part. I'm not really sure that they do it deliberately, necessarily all the time. I haven't seen any evidence that they're smart enough to figure all of that out, let alone with something like 911. But that's a whole other podcast, and I'm happy to talk about that. So it's a bit wag the dog, and I think that it's good to be aware of some more specifics in terms of the realm that we're in when we come online, and to wake up to what we're participating in as well. When we come here, it's very easy to just sort of automatically accept the way that it works and the way that it runs and the way social media works and runs, and adopt it as some new type of normal, when for a start all those networks are just cults. They're not government-run networks, they're private companies, and they're cults. In the same way that iPhone is a cult, that different brands of technology are all cults. The internet is host to a bunch of cults that we're participating in. And when it comes to having access to a worldwide audience, through fiber optics and mobile communications, we're no longer just making an international phone call. We are, in a sense, teleporting our consciousness to that country, making the connection. But we're sort of meeting somewhere in, cyberspace, even though at either end of that connection is sort of my house and the other person's house. They're in my lounge room, when I talk to somebody in a different country, and I'm in theirs or wherever they may be. So I think probably where they drop the ball is not understanding consciousness, the presence of consciousness, and just sort of calling it data and real-time communication through typing and videos and live streaming, for the sake of sort of pulling everyone together under the one umbrella for reasons that we're aware of, surveillance and all the rest of it. But the fact that it's all illegal is really been sort of swept under the rug, and the audacity of these people to do that, and place everyone in danger and at risk. If you really have a look at some of the things that have happened over the last decade or more as a result of social media, and the role that social media has played, the role that the internet has played in some of the events in the world, it's caused more harm than good. That's an indisputable fact. It's actually caused more harm than good, and they are definitely they're definitely losing this game of theirs, because as we move forward without them attending to their mistakes, and them just to keep on creating band-aid solutions and solutions that restrict our freedoms, that's not sustainable at all. That can't be sustained in any living system, and it's not going to work for them. It will backfire. They won't get their automated economy. It simply won't. It can't work, because that's not how living systems operate. So anyway, look, I'm going to keep this one short, and I just wanted to sort of add that onto the previous podcast of public health and safety and why the internet is illegal, and pull the focus to national security and why the internet is illegal. The laws have been broken. Somebody somewhere assumed that they could rewrite them. More than likely, big tech, the states, the agendas that are flying around back there to inure everybody to automation, automated economies, artificial intelligence, absolute and total control of the human population, but they're using a tool that places them in immediate danger. It's kind of oddly funny. If you have dark sense of humour like I do, that's pretty hilarious. They're running around out there with all the guns and weapons in the world and huge defence budgets, but they're putting everybody at risk, including themselves, with the technology that they're using to try and get their agenda advanced. And the rest of them, I don't believe is smart enough to know or to plan anything deliberately enough in advance. When we understand a little bit more about how the matrix underneath that's pulling this simulation together works, we come to understand that the technology and the coding is really what's driving a lot of the problems that they rush forward with a solution for, and just seem to cause more oppression. Again, that's not sustainable. And I think, there's some comfort to be taken in that knowledge that it's not sustainable, that their method's not sustainable, that these networks and the nature of open systems where you can jump on and speak to anyone anywhere in the world is obviously not safe. It's a national security risk, a direct national security threat, actually, and that there might be better ways of going about this in the future. But possibly a very controversial topic, because there are lots of fors and againsts. But we really, I think, need to look at the overall impact that the internet has had in the say the last decade to 15 years, and have a look at the sharp increase in the negative impact that it's had, and then try and weigh that up against the positive impact that it's had. And I think we start to get a better picture of what this tool is really doing, and from there we can move forward and look at ways to alter our course a little, because if they keep going this way, it's not going to end well for them. As I've said, their methods are not sustainable in living systems. So, food for thought once again. Stay safe, and I'll be back again soon.